Of all the protected classes where you have to be on guard not to use the offensive terms, ageism is still not even considered.
So if we see older characters being portrayed as morons who are just leeching on society, then we start to treat older people like that in real life, which then circles back in and saying we're not going to hire an older person because we know they're idiots, we know they're useless because we've seen it on TV and we believe it.
Thanks for joining me today on the Work in Progress podcast. David Gittins, Executive Director of Age Inclusion in Media, Ron Friedman, President of Age Inclusion in Media, and a veteran comedy writer. I guess we could say we're comedy writers too, right, David?
Yeah, people have laughed at my writing.
Not just comedy, anything. Ransom notes especially.
I get a lot of requests for that, but it doesn't pay as much. Yeah, I'm writing the wrong amount, I think, down on the ransom notes.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to have you both on because we sit on a board together. I do sit on the AIM, Age Inclusion in Media board, and it's very important to talk about ageism, not just in Hollywood, but in general. So I wanted to start out, and maybe, David, let's start with you a little bit about how age is portrayed in the media and why that affects us like all throughout society and the workforce.
Sure. The way age is portrayed in the media is still, it's still in a very regressive way of dealing with it. It's still a very stereotypical way. That's down to the fact that we don't have proper representation behind the screen. We don't have proper representation in the writer's room. So when we don't have older writers writing for older characters, we get stereotypical portrayals of what an older character is, which means we get tropes, we get cranky old characters, we get forgetful old characters, and we get sidekicks as opposed to central characters in their own lives. So that's at the thin end of that wedge. When we get to the thick end, we get into the realms of advertising and how poorly advertising deals with age, given that most people who are working in advertising are in their 30s maximum. And where that has an impact is because what we call the cycle of ageism, it starts with writing, then it shows what we show, and from what we show on screen, the representation, that teaches us how to believe. And that then teaches us how to act. So if we see older characters being portrayed as passive morons who are just leeching on society, then we start to treat older people like that in real life, which then circles back in and saying we're not going to hire an older person because we know they're idiots, we know they're useless because we've seen it on TV and we believe it.
And Ron, we talked about this many times. We've all talked about this,
Yes.
That ageism is that last ism that's acceptable in our society now.
Well, not only is it acceptable, but of all the protected classes where you have to be on guard not to use the offensive terms or reproduce the memes that are offensive, ageism is still not even considered. It's funny to be old. I found that out. I knew I was hilarious when I was writing for comedians, but I didn't know I became hilarious the older I became. And yet it's true. Example, Home for the Aged. Old woman says to an old man, $100, I'll guess your age. What do you she says, put your 100 down with mine. If I'm wrong, you take $200. Okay. What do? She says, take off your pants and bend over. $200 at stake. Takes off his pants. He bends over and she says, 94, 6 months, 3 weeks. He said, that's amazing. How did you do it? She said, you told me yesterday. Hilarious.
We laughed, right?
You're supposed to. Yeah. An old couple in their 90s get married. They spend the honeymoon getting out of the car. As Burt Reynolds was famously said on a Tonight Show, I'm so old I fart dust. Okay, that's a joke on yourself. You're allowed to do that. But the idea is that you become hilarious, if not offensive, when you are old. Nothing in between. And if you're hiring, what do you look for? I don't want offensive, and I don't want hilarious. I want somebody that can lift that barge, tote that bale, and if they go to jail, they don't call my lawyer. That is not us. But I think those of you who might be looking at this will say, He may still have a few of his marbles. I hope I have a lot of them. I know I'm more than 2.5 times older than Taylor Swift. I had a marvelous career until ageism destroyed me. Then I became a principal, a lead named plaintiff in 29 lawsuits about ageism. After almost 11 years, we received a $70 million mediated settlement. It made nobody well, and it hasn't changed a thing. I'm old, I'm hilarious, also unnecessary. I'll just say this one more thing about age. When I was a young writer, and I wasn't always old, I looked upon older writers who had written the radio shows I loved with awe, and they were terrific. Some of my greatest friends were Jack Benny radio writers from the 30s and 40s. They were damn good. That's why I laughed and loved Jack Benny when I was a kid. And I was thrilled to be in their presence. There was always an older writer or two on any half-hour or hour show. Why? To ensure that nobody had to eat the script because it didn't work. And then suddenly, Brandon Tartikoff became the president of NBC and made a pronouncement, hire no writers older than 30. If you have any, get rid of them. He later said that he was misquoted, but everybody listened. I figured that out the hard way. My wife and I were at a friend's daughter's wedding in upstate New York. I had 2 pilots going at NBC. One of them was supposed to shoot. It was cast. The sets were built. The other one had been approved. The sets were being built. I received a call. We decided to go another way. I said, what does that mean? We decided to go another way. I said, you mean another way without me? They said, yes. I said, I have pay or play. It's going to cost you a lot of money. Well, we're prepared because we want to go another way. They did. They hired teams of younger writers. Neither of those pilots ever got made. Well, wait, one got made later on and never got picked up. I said, would they have worked had my script been used? I think so. There'd been a better chance. But that began the diminution of earnings, which ended up with a lot of financial tragedy at a time when I was supporting 4 separate households. My mother in Pittsburgh, my in-laws in Palm Springs, my ex-wife who had an aneurysm and disabled, my wife and 3 kids. I mean, I was doing it. And then suddenly, I'm persona non grata. The worst thing is when a lot of younger writers whom I helped knew my situation, they couldn't hire me. They said, you're too old. They said those words, you're too old. Anybody watching now, I'm willing to do yard work if you don't think I'm too old to rake leaves. I will now seed the floor and slumber.
I'll wake you up in a minute.
Thank you.
Okay. So, David, what is the age breakdown of like the writer's room, the writer's industry right now?
Well, according to the Writers Guild of America's latest figures, 44% of working writers are under the age of 40 in the kind of roughly 24 to 39 age, which is a 15-year period. And there's 44% working there. So that means 56% are actually over the age of 40, which means 56% of writers are in the age-protected class. So the Writers Guild doesn't see a problem. However, if we dig deeper into those figures, we see there is a serious problem. The first problem is that this deals with writers who are employed. And the Guild's figures deal with people who are called current. And when you've lost your job because of ageism, you lose your status from current to post-current. And when you become post-current, you don't get counted in Writers Guild statistics. So you become invisible. And you're not allowed to run in Writers Guild elections, and you're not allowed to be on Writers Guild committees. So you become invisible. The ageism becomes totally ignored. So we still have 56% of working writers in the protected class. And the majority of those are in their early 40s. So they've started work in their 20s and 30s, and they're in their early 40s. By the time they get to their 50s, it changes. The first 15 years, you're overrepresented. The next 15 years, you're doing okay. And then from about 55 onwards, 1% of working writers are over 55. That's who aren't at the showrunner or near showrunner.
I was going to say, I think most of those people are people with a lot of experience, probably, who have track records where they can.
Yeah.
They're not the ones who are being invited into the writer's room as a staff writer.
No, well, that's the thing. It's the upper echelons, the people making very high 6 figures, 7 figure salaries. They're the ones who are still employed. The middle class writers over the age of 55 are they look at the plague of unicorns. There's more of those. So that's the problem. We have overrepresentation at the younger ages and poor representation to zero representation at the older ages. But the Guild isn't interested in hearing about this at the moment because writers on the first few years of their career aren't having a good time anyway. So it's still better than the people who are unemployed.
And Ron, you're 91.
91. And I'm going to tell you something ironic to show whoever's watching that I'm hip. I'm with it. You can't do irony unless you're on Saturday Night Live. And they're aging too. Have you noticed? Pretty soon they'll be put out to pasture. But this is this. I mentioned Brandon Tartikoff. On more than one occasion, he called me in to punch up a pilot because it wasn't funny enough. And here's what he said. I need somebody that can write starkers. Starker is a Yiddish word for strong. And this is what the vernacular of being a stand-up comedian or comedian through many, many years, you could deliver starkers, jokes that made everybody laugh. He said, the group I have now, they don't know how to do that. No kidding. So I'd be called in and get a lot of money to come in for 2 or 3 days and sometimes longer without meeting the original writers usually and just punch it up and bring in a bunch of jokes. I did that. And this is the guy that made it impossible. And yet he recognized when he needed help, he came to the old man. It's insane. Example, how many symphony conductors are shot because they're too old? They have to be dragged away when they're in their hundreds. Nobody says too old to conduct. Picasso, nobody says, what the hell is he still painting for? I mean, the guy's over 40. No. And I'm going to say this, which is problematic, but I believe true. Writers are artists. We are artists. We create what we envision. If we do it well as writers, we enable whoever reads the script or whoever watches what we've written to see and hear exactly what we've envisioned. What a creation. An indelible one, and I'll tell you why. Out of the many, many, many shows that I wrote, and I wrote over 700 hours of mostly primetime top 10 television in all genres, a lot of them have been running continuously since I wrote them. I still get residuals. I still get fan mail. Somebody, I forget where it was, Jamaica or maybe an unlisted country, wrote to tell me that they loved my Odd Couple. How nice. I wrote that, I don't know, in the 70s, but they're still playing. I must have known something valuable to contribute what I contributed to give something that life expectancy where it does what? It entertains, it amuses, it engages human beings. And with AI coming, of course, human beings may be expendable. So I maybe should just resort to my robot voice and tell you everything will be okay.
I just saw somebody posted on Facebook. Oh, I'm old. I'm on Facebook. I saw somebody.
Wrinkled Facebook, please. It's a separate category.
And what they posted, I'd rather AI do my make it easier for me to do my laundry or my dishes than write. So then I have more time to write instead of it taking over my writing.
Great.
So but think about this. This is what I always talk about AI, is where are they getting that material from? They're getting it from people like you, people like me.
They are stealing it.
Something that's already there that come out of your mind.
Oh, you may not know this. I'm a member of the Dramatists Guild because I'm also a playwright. They had a special symposium in a magazine issue about protecting your work from AI. And there are certain pronouncements and contracts, that codicils you have to add to your theatrical agreements so that AI cannot immediately drag it up and use it and reuse it without paying you. So I have to check and see if there's one that might correspond for the Writers Guild for television and film. I haven't done that yet because being old is time consuming.
The technology companies don't give the impression that they'll play nicely on this because they never have in the past.
Never.
You know, if you look at Spotify and how it treated musicians, you know, there's a huge generation of musicians now who can't make a living because
composers particularly.
Yeah, but Spotify makes billionaires out of Spotify shareholders. AI will go the same way. We can push it and push it and push it until it's irrelevant to us. But
yes, it costs nothing.
In 30, 40, 50 years time,
well, I'm sure
it's going to be very difficult to make a living.
Well, Ron will sue then.
Well,
30, 40, 50 years from now, Ron will sue.
More lawsuits.
Yeah, more lawsuits.
I don't know many ministers who want to do a generic A1 funeral oration. They want to write it so they can pretend they knew the deceased. But I don't want a generic anything. I didn't want a generic marriage. I don't want generic breakfast. I don't want generic clothes. I want to be me. There's songs with that title. And there's a reason for it. It's the indelibility of the individual that creates society and that feeds society everything it needs. And artists are the conscience of and the reminders of these questions that rise in society about, is this good? Is this bad? Is this licit or illicit? Will it make you feel better? I don't agree with Hemingway's philosophy about what's good is whatever you feel good after doing, because there are a lot of monsters that feel good after burning a city down. But writers remind us of our humanity. And if we do it well, we create an emotional event for those that witness or read what we've created. Without that emotional input, what is life? Without the music and the mood that presents and the feeling that it generates, how short and long or endless would life seem? Without the ability to remember a moment in a book you've read or something you've seen on a screen or something an actor did on stage, those are moments by which life becomes livable and beautiful. And life is made up of moments. That's what we remember. It doesn't matter what you had for breakfast on Tuesday. It's how you felt when you heard something at your kid's graduation from college, or what you felt when your child said his first sentence. And I remember one of my daughter's first sentences when I gave her Coca-Cola, and I said, "How does it taste?" And she said, "It tastes like your foot's asleep." Is that brilliant? And at the same time, my son's sort of first sentence was, we were in the park, beautiful day in Central Park. And I said, "Boy, the view from here is great." He said, "Yes. And when I'm older, I'll see more." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, right now my eyes are tiny, but as I grow, my eyes will become larger and I'll see more." No AI is going to generate that, but it will be happy to steal it and then see what it can build upon.
But you see, there's a tie-in here where it shows the value of the older you get, the more life experience you have and the more unique life experience you have. So, a newborn baby has a newborn baby's experience and it's pretty similar. But if you're in your 90s, you've got a very, very unique path to be there and very, very unique set of experiences. That means if Ron writes something, it comes from a set of experiences that only Ron has ever had. And so AI can't replicate that. So in a way, perhaps the defense against AI creativity is older writers, because you've got more unique experiences.
And that goes to the idea that how do you, going back to what we started talking about at the beginning, is how do you write for a 50-year-old if you are a 20-year-old? You can be a brilliant 20-year-old writer, but you don't have that lived experience. And wouldn't we want to see a 90-year-old writing for a 90-year-old, a 50-year-old writing for a 50-year-old? We are all creative, but I feel that's where the representation gets lost, where, you say we laugh at the old jokes, right? You can laugh at yourself, right? That's fine. But if everything about an old person is a joke, I think you lose that humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I was writing for TV in my 20s. I was writing on one show where there were older characters, but we had other things in common. It was part of the world we were from, and like the sport, so many things. But the actor, we had connections, so I found those characters easy to write to. But if you said to me, write a guy in the 70s when I was 20, but you're going to say, write a guy from the north of England who's lived this life, okay, I can do that. So we've got to look for those commonalities. And but I think we're losing that. And if we go back to Ron's earlier point and the name drop about Tartikoff, when it was the era of must-see TV, of course, that brought out Friends. And Friends was the most successful show on the planet. And it probably still is. And the showrunners, show creators, made a big point of why they were successful. And they said they were successful because they didn't hire any writer over the age of 30.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone else in the industry said, we'll follow suit.
That's the answer.
Yeah. So every writer who is in their 30s and beyond was pretty
got
much
a job.
made redundant. And so we went from having a very age-inclusive industry to one which wasn't. And we've not recovered from that since.
No, there's additional truth to that, and that's this. Anytime a show is a hit, and television is a voracious user of everything, everybody wants to duplicate that success. How do you duplicate that success? You get the people who made it successful.
Right.
So it was Cheers. And everybody on that show became enormously hot. And when Cheers went off the air, even before, the craft services guy was offered like 5 times what he had made before, because who knew if that wasn't the magic potion? The hairdresser on another show, I forget which, suddenly was offered 4 times as much. He was the hairdresser. Who knows that wasn't the magic ingredient? Also, many of the writers who were staff on these shows didn't actually write the finished product. Whoever was running the show fixed it or made it work or actually wrote the episode. But because they had the credit, they suddenly were hired by studios and by networks and given contracts that did not pay Writers Guild minimum. They paid them enormous amounts beyond that. So suddenly shows that were being written for scale, no way. You now needed one of these anointed writers who had these enormous paychecks. So that immediately took people out of the running who had ability and anointed those who had the good fortune to be there when the bus went by and the gold dollars were tossed out. Anyway, do I sound bitter? I'm not. I am pissed off, but there is a difference. Bitterness is sit there and take it. Pissed off is listen to me. Do I make sense? It's like this. Shakespeare wrote a beautiful, brilliant Lady Macbeth and a beautiful, brilliant Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing. Shakespeare was not a woman, but he was an artist. And an artist, if he, she, they are really good, they feel that. They see the human quality which transcends insignificant stuff like gender, place of birth, color. All the good stuff that really matters has nothing to do with any of that. Nothing. Zero. You don't judge people by their wardrobe, where they come from, what their color is, what their sex. That's meaningless. Are they a good guy? Are they an idiot? Are they dangerous? Are they safe? That's it. Artists are required to recognize that, be sensitive to it, and when they feel they can get the advantage of finding somebody else who has life experience they don't have, they call them up. They call them in. It's called, if you don't know, find out. And you don't find out by excluding those who might give you the information you need. I rest my case, but not for a while.
So what do you do about it? David?
That's the question.
Yeah. Solve the problem. This is what I always say on my podcast. Okay, that's the problem. Now solve it. How do we solve it?
Well, through age inclusion, we've focused on the supply side. Because of a lot of our writers were I'd been out of the business 15, 20 years. So we focused on getting writers back up to speed in today's business. But that's only the supply side. We really need to fix the demand side. And there just isn't enough demand for older writers and for older characters and positive portrayals of older characters. And I think that comes down to advertisers. I think it's a really messed up industry.
I think so too.
Until we deal with how advertising deals with the age, we're not going to deal with how networks deal with age, because their aim is to make the advertisers happy. We need to fix the advertising industry, and we need to fix the portrayal of how older characters are portrayed in advertising.
I agree that that's where the pressure point should be, where the money is generated.
Yeah.
Because that is the only responsive chord that can be struck. If it's going to cost you money, you have to listen. And that is, the advertising is a place to put that pressure, because the streaming services were free and now there are commercials on. You can pay not to have commercials, but then you're paying for what you were getting free. So once again, we're back there. You have to pay for what you like, and you have to like it enough to want to pay for it. And the advertisers are always looking for the eyeballs and the earballs, or whatever the balls come from. And that's where pressure has to be applied. But it can't be just by fiat or by declaration. It has to be in a way that attracts sufficient attention so it can't be ignored.
Well, direct action gets results. So we can talk about it and give everybody the information to act with it. But until we say, this advertiser has portrayed these characters badly, let's boycott this advertiser.
Okay, there's one problem with that, is most of the advertisers traditionally now on television are drug manufacturers.
Yeah,
and targeting the older
adult. You need the drug.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm not picketing the places making me my medicine, and they know that.
Okay, forget that idea, David.
Okay,
no, but wait a minute.
It's a good point, though.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
To show up in front of Pfizer.
Yeah,
but I also think, I've always thought that a lot of, and I say older, and we talk about it at Working Nation, that an older person now is in 40 plus, right? Your mid-career or later part of your career, but people are living longer, working longer. They're watching TV, and
absolutely.
The advertisers are targeting them with a lot of those drug ads.
You bet.
So I find there's like a circular question I have. If older people are watching TV and the advertising is portraying older people in a bad light, how do you get out of that cycle?
But again, back down to what Ron just said, they're advertising products that are life or death.
Yes. I just thought of something I haven't thought of in years. When I was a kid, the number one bestseller was a book called Life Begins at 40. And in those days, I think the life expectancy of the average American man was something like 64, 62. Life begins at 40. So I thought of writing I'm 91 is the new 55, because that's how I feel about it. But the fact is, everything has changed, and many of the things that have changed have not been acknowledged and never will be until you're run down by them and there's no way to turn away. So I feel I'm more viable and better at what I've been doing than ever. But I can't get anybody who can actually put anything to work to even read or talk to me. It's a joke. They know how old I am. And if I'm old, I'm no longer gold.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of the things that you have done, including I Killed Optimus Prime.
I have killed the book Optimus Prime?
Yes. Tell me, why did you kill Optimus Prime?
Well, I didn't like his attitude.
Yeah.
I killed him because they paid me to do it, but also because if you know the system, if you know that particular show and the toy connected to it, I came to Hasbro's attention with G.I. Joe. They wanted to do a G.I. Joe pilot for an animated series, and they did not believe that the writers in Hollywood writing animation could do it. They wanted a real writer. And they had a kind of talent competition, and I won. One of the reasons I won is I said, I don't want to do a 22-minute pilot to introduce your 800 products, because by the time you've introduced all of these toys, the kids are asleep or they've left the room. So I want to do it in a 5-part miniseries. I did that. It was successful. I did 3 of them. And Hasbro said, we have this show called Transformers. They showed me, they sent me toys and so on. And they did 60 episodes in Japan. And they had American writers redo them. And they said, we want you to rewrite these 60 episodes to give character to the characters, senses of humor, and do what you did in G.I. Joe, which is you created not nobility for the good guys. You created a good family, a bad family, because it's always family. That is the story of mythology. That is what we've been running on ever since we came down out of the trees or out of the caves. And I think it was longer ago than 6,000 years, at least. But it doesn't matter. I did that. And they said to me, we want to do the feature film, first animated feature that wasn't a Walt Disney product. And they said, how do you feel about killing some characters? I said, great, because Walt Disney recognized it's yin and yang, it's dark and light, it's life and death, which kids really understand. Snow White didn't go to Florida. She was going to be a living corpse. So they recognized that. And they said, what about killing Optimus Prime? I said, great. I said, but you'll have to resurrect him in 90 days. Never. Well, they had him back up and running like in 2 weeks, because you can't kill Odin in Norse mythology. You can't kill Zeus in Greek mythology. Anyway, I was invited to Comic Cons and Transformer Cons repeatedly, but I didn't want to go because I still felt I'm a real writer. I don't. By the way, a real writer gets a Writers Guild deal. I got a Writers Guild deal on all of that stuff, and they haven't been paying me my residuals for many years. But let me get beyond that, because it sounds like I'm not dealing with fact. The fact is, I was invited, so I wrote that book so I'd have something to sell. And I was a senile rock star, because those first 60 episodes that I rewrote and the movie, The Transformers, the movie has become what they call G1. In other words, that's the preferred, the best, the most interesting, the most fun. And they've, in Japan, there have been several toy companies manufacturing Transformers as they were in that year, 1986. It's an enormous success, and I'm an enormous success when I go there. And I'm glad I wrote that book. Anyway.
You're kind of like the Jerry Lewis in France. Like he was like really big in France. Huge in France.
Oui, of course. When somebody said, but Jerry Lewis is beloved in France. Yeah, but they like that stinky cheese. But Jerry Lewis was brilliant. Jerry treated me well, so I have nothing bad to say about him. But Jerry Lewis invented contemporary filmmaking up to a point by thinking, let's put a television camera next to a movie camera so we don't have to wait till tomorrow to look at the dailies. Brilliant.
In terms of history of television, you also knew Lucille Ball, who created the multicam sitcom.
Oh, yes, I did. Lucy Ball. I loved Lucy. With my former partner, Pat McCormick, who could embarrass a toilet seat. We wrote an hour special for CBS called Lucy in London. And it was great fun to do. And Steve Bender was the director who pioneered a lot of remote broadcasting. It was great fun. Why am I talking about fun? I'm not supposed to have fun anymore. I'm supposed to take my enema and shut up. But
enemas can be fun.
I'm not that kind of guy. Anyway, where were we going?
Oh, I just wanted to, look, you just mentioned Jerry Lewis and Pat McCormick. I love Pat McCormick and Lucille Ball. And these are people that are still comedy icons,
yes,
right? Lucy is still on everywhere.
Constantly.
So there's this idea that creativity lives on.
Has run its course and no longer applies?
No, it lives on. It has not run its course. People still love it.
One of the most frequent letters I get are from people who've seen Gilligan's Island for the first time. Now, I won't say that is my Nobel Prize, but I always enjoyed writing anything because I needed the money, and also because I always said, I'm going to make this the best episode of even a show that I don't hold in esteem. But I held them all in esteem because anything that commands an enormous audience for more than one episode has got to have something magical about it. And the Writers Guild cited me for having written for 5 of the 101 best written series. All in the Family, The Andy Griffith Show, Barney Miller Gets Smart, and The Odd Couple. I also wrote for Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, Chico and the Man, Starsky and Hutch, Fantasy Island, Gilligan's Island. I have to think hard because there were so many of them.
There's 700 episodes. You can't remember
700 hours, because some of them were half hours, some of them were hours, and some of the other stuff were movies of the week.
See, that's how, when I first met Ron, I knew him already because he was my babysitter as a kid.
Yes.
Part of your family already.
Oh, God. Yeah. How about that?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, but I think one of the things that I love about being a writer myself, and David, you could talk to this too, is you are pulling stuff out of your brain.
You use it all.
You use it all, your experiences, your imagination. And to be able to share that with people is an important thing.
It really is, particularly when you see it makes a difference in their life, as a difference was made in mine by Superman comics. My brother and I, we were there when Superman comics came out, when Batman came out. In fact, I met Bob Kane, who created Batman, who did nothing but Batman until he died at 142. And in his last years, he was making oil paintings of the Joker and Batman and Robin for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Somehow, he did not age, nor did the icon he created. Stan Lee was a close personal friend, a frequent writing partner with me. For Stan, I did the first live action movie for the Fantastic Four. I wrote that script for the Mighty Thor, for Luke Cage, and for Iron Man. But Stan and I would share the story credit. I would write the script. When we went into the meetings, and we always went in to the top people because it was Stan Lee, every one of them said the same thing. Boy, this is a great script. Ron and Stan. But it's comic book time. It's kiddie time. It's animation. Our audience, we do real movies for real people. They're not interested in this. They're not interested. And I said to Stan, but they're interested. Nope. Not until Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire was done, and done just as Stan had intended the original episode to be done. This is a conflicted teenager in love with the girl next door, and he doesn't have enough money to take her to the movies. And his Aunt May is desperate, and his uncle is dead. And what does a kid do? And he gets these superpowers. Everybody identifies with this.
It's a story.
It is.
It's a story.
It's a human story that you all get.
Yeah.
Because it's family related. And here's the deal with a family. Is there anybody here who needs explanation for the 82-year-old aunt who was a hot number at 20 and still dresses that way? Is there anybody who doesn't have an uncle that moons the school bus? Of course not. You have to explain a relative that is totally nuts, but everybody loves him or her because they're generous. Does anybody not know somebody or feel that? It's you've never had a family, you will create a surrogate family. I'll give you a personal story that has done me a lot of good. My father died when I was 12. My brother and I were staying at an aunt's house while my father was in the hospital. My uncle woke me at 4 a.m. and he says, "Your daddy died. Don't cry. You're the man in the family now." I didn't cry. And for years, I tried to be the man in the family. I got to tell you, it's tough to get a very good job at 12. There are not many with job security.
Hard enough.
Yeah, at least not those that support a family.
They don't go anywhere. Anyway, I needed a dad, and somebody said to me, "You look like Doc Blanchard." Doc Blanchard was an Army football player who played fullback. And I looked at his pictures, and I thought, if they say so, yeah. I cut out his picture and put it in my wallet. And when I had trouble, I'd think, what would Doc Blanchard do?
No.
It didn't help because I wasn't playing football. But I did it anyway. I created a surrogate family or part of it. So everyone understands that. And if you can deliver that, it's amazing. I was invited to what best can be called a convocation of brain scientists at the Skirball Center here several years ago. And one of the doctors sent me a note without signing it. I think you'll be particularly interested in this panel. And the panel was basically about communication, human communication in terms of brain science, neurology. I went to that panel, and the prestigious guy who was from England stood up and he said, all of our interrelated studies have led us to this conclusion. There are three dominant factors in dealing with human communication in the brain, and they are story, story, story. He said, in an effort to validate this, we decided to do an experiment, and we got volunteers who were clinically depressed. Clinical depression is not like, gee, it was a bummer. Clinical depression is near suicide, and they volunteered because they thought anything that might help them, they would try. And here was the test. Each of these subjects were in a sealed room with a one-way glass. They were given virtual reality gear, and a speaker went through the speakers and said to them, this is your assignment. A teenage girl is dying in a diabetic coma in a hospital. She needs insulin to live. It is your job to find the insulin and get it to her so it can be administered within this next, I think it was 9 minutes. And the virtual reality showed the subject in a maze, and they were given visual, verbal clues to get out of it. And when they got out, they were in the top of a tall building. What next? And the voice said, you can fly. And so using this digital reality, they flew until they were directed to or found the building that had the pharmacy that had the insulin. They then got the insulin and were directed to find the room in the hospital. They did. They delivered it. She was given the injection, and she came out of the coma. And the voice said, you have saved her life. Their brains were being monitored as this was happening. And when you have saved her life, the brain lit up as if they'd been given the Nobel Prize and cocaine. Unbelievable happiness. And they were interviewed after that, and every one of them had become an altruist. They were only interested in being able to duplicate this for others who are unable to. This is the power of story. This is what we have done for a living, and this is what I have done that I'm proud of, that's brought happiness and continued involvement and a lift out of the boredom and drudgery of life to provide some moments of hilarity, of adventure, of imagination. That is a noble calling. And to be prevented from plying my proved worth in this craft, I find that insulting. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Yeah, there's something I meant to mention, which is the COVID pandemic, did more to isolate these kids who hope to be writers, hope to be artists, so that their actual experience of interaction with fellow human beings of any age has been curtailed severely. And they have been able to, in effect, build the universe that they find the most comfortable in the confines of their house, where they have, in fact, been confined and prevented from being in the larger world. So I saw this teaching class at Chapman University. I taught 18 years at USC Film School, and I'm in my 19th year teaching at Chapman. I found those kids were isolated. They did not know how to behave in the company of their peers. They had no face-to-face experience. And when they saw someone older, someone different, they didn't immediately accept. It was like, do I run or do I fight? It was literally the fight or flight evaluation, which is really primitive, primordial. And yet that's what they were going through because they had been denied that growth-stimulating experience of interacting with people who are not like you. And they, with that non-experience in life, were required to write life, which is what writers do. And I had a hell of a time with my class because they didn't know what a writer did. They didn't read much. Why read when you can just get online, or you could be on Facebook or TikTok or eat this or whatever the latest get at it immediately was. So they have been deprived of a growing experience within the human community. And they are the definition of unreal. So when they wrote about anybody older, I would say, make it your grandpa. Make it somebody old you know. Make it somebody that betrayed you. Who betrayed you? Was it mom? That's what you're writing about. Who loves you even though you don't love them? That's what you write about, so that somebody can feel what you felt and could not act on when you were stuck in your room. It helped, but they still didn't realize the value of what they got because they didn't value the human interchange. It wasn't coin of their realm for a couple of years. How do you put a face on that, which is what you do when you write for any visual medium? How do you put a voice on that when you don't recognize when you see it or don't recognize it when you hear it? Because you've never interacted with it in any meaningful way.
I hate to say this, but we're out of time. David, thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
And thank you for letting me sit next to Ron for an hour.
Thank you for letting me sit next to Ron for an hour.
It was really great being able to vent in company that is understanding. Because if you don't understand any of this, it's easy to say, you're just bitching all the time. And what the hell, your day is past, get over it. So I don't believe that. And I know, I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I was called into Fox. Somebody said, we've been watching some of your shows and they're great. Come in and pitch something. So I go in to pitch at Fox thinking, how on earth did this happen? And there's a young guy in shorts and flip-flops with his feet on the desk, and he's on 2 cell phones. And there are 2 young girls wearing as little as possible, taking notes on his every utterance. And I sit down and say, hey, come on. And he's on the phone. So I start pitching, and he's not listening, and they're not writing. I said, this is wrong for you, but I have a reality show you might like. He says, yeah, what's that? I said, a sealed bus with blacked out windows picks up 50 old people, drives them to the Mojave Desert, and lets them off. And as the bus pulls out, the driver says, you're fucked. And the bus comes back every week to see who's alive. There's dead silence. And then the guy said, they can't be old people. Flesh it out and come back.